Let's get to some news today on Locked On Pacers. Pacers made some moves on last Friday, actually. But what else do they have to do this offseason, and what about their moves last week? We'll telegraph some of those moves. We'll cover some roster stuff today. Plus, the Locked On NBA Top 50 is out. Tyrese Haliburton ranked as a top 50 player. Is that right? How can he move up? And EuroBasket is done. Daniel Tice gets a medal. We'll cover it all today and more on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name is Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the West Side Community News. And today, maybe one of the last news days before the Pacers hit the court for training camp next week. Hey, big news to talk about. Obviously, the Pacers signed some players last Friday. I want to cover the rest of the moves on the docket for the Pacers this offseason. Other signings that they could or should make, rookie scale options, extensions, all this stuff, two-way slots still on the table for the Pacers this offseason. Then we'll bring in Nick Angstadt, channel manager for Locked On NBA and host of Locked On Mavs, to talk about one, Locked On NBA Top 50 players in the NBA from the Locked On Podcast Network. And Tyrese Haliburton makes the list. Is he in the right spot? Should he move up? Is this a good way to evaluate players? Because we did it a little differently here at Locked On. And at the end, EuroBasket is done. Daniel Tice, bronze medal. Goga Bitadze, good stats, not great tournament overall. Talk about EuroBasket and how that tournament was awesome. And there's some rules the NBA should take from it. But we'll jump into the big roster news, the big thing that everybody would like to know about the Pacers. What's next for their team? Their roster is full. They signed 5 players last Friday. We covered a lot of that Monday. Kendall Brown in on a 2-way deal. James Johnson in on a non-guaranteed deal. And then Exhibit 10 deals for Benny Boatwright, Gabe York, and David Stockton. Let's do a little reporting here off the jump. As I guessed on Monday's show, educated guessing I should call it, I can now confirm Exhibit 10 deals for York and Stockton and Boatwright, as well as David Das Servitas, who they signed back in August. So those guys, if they're waived before the season starts, and then they report to the Mad Ants for 60 days, will get a bonus. It's a $50,000 bonus for Servitas, Stockton, and York. It's a $10,000 bonus for Benny Boatwright. So bonuses coming for those guys if they would get waived. If they make the Pacers, they obviously get paid even more in that way. And then James Johnson, Exhibit 9 contract, as predicted, non-guaranteed 1-year minimum deal. Exhibit 9 basically means if he gets injured before the season starts, Pacers can cut him, and the injury protection part of contracts does not apply. $6,000 cap hit. Basically, it's just an injury protection exhibit. 1-year non-guaranteed minimum contract for James Johnson. Okay, as expected, that leaves the Pacers the most flexibility to do stuff still before the season starts, right? They could cut any or all of those guys, except for Kendall Brown, who's on the 2-way. They could cut him too, in theory, but they shouldn't. And free up roster space to do other stuff. So potential moves still to come for the Pacers this offseason. I typed it as the Exhibit 10 dance. The Exhibit 10 dance, woohoo. Last year they did it as well. They cut Kiefer Sykes and Terry Taylor and another player who I cannot remember, Nate Hinton, there we go, after the preseason was done. And then they signed Boatwright and get Justin Anderson and Derek Culver to Exhibit 10 deals. And then those guys got waived the next day, right? Every year teams do this. They try to get G League rights for guys and give them a bonus to be in their organization. Pacers might do that here as well. And so I call it the Exhibit 10 dance because there's a chance there's other guys who could potentially take Exhibit 10 deals from the Pacers. The 4 guys who were reported a while ago to potentially be in the mix, who played in Summer League: Eli Brooks, Tevin Brown, Fambo Zhang, and I cannot remember the fourth one. For the life of me, I've had trouble keeping up. Jermaine Samuels. I've had trouble keeping up with all these names in the process. They aren't signed yet. They were reported to be, but they could be if there's moves later in the offseason. And then Norvel Pell, NBA vet for a couple of years, played with the 76ers before. I think he played for the Portland Trailblazers last year. I know he's not a name many of you have heard in the Pacers sphere, but he has exactly 3 years of experience. The Jazz, that's who he played for last year. The Mad Ants just acquired him in a trade where they sent away Nate Hinton's G League rights to the Canton Charge. Perhaps he's a guy that's in the mix for an Exhibit 10 deal as well. he has been in the NBA before. So maybe you'll see some cuts and some signings from the Pacers. Don't be surprised by that. I certainly think you'll see some because of the reported Exhibit 10 signings that we heard before the season started. But the number of them, how many of them, what kind of deals guys are signed to is sort of TBD and in the air. And if you're on an Exhibit 10 deal, you can be converted to a two-way contract. So if any of the Exhibit 10 guys stand out while they're signed, perhaps they don't get cut as a part of the dance and they stay in competition for a two-way slot. Now, non-guaranteed contracts like James Johnson, like O'Shea Brissett in theory, although he won't be cut, like all the Exhibit 10 guys, can be moved anytime, and you can have up to 20 guys in the offseason. So remember, Evan Sidery of Basketball News reported Langston Galloway as a name for the Pacers. Lance Stevenson's obviously been going to be named for forever and ever. They still have his cap hold on the books. Same with Nate Hittens, although his rights are in Cleveland now. Either way, what you could see is other moves that bring in guys on Exhibit 9 deals to compete for the Pacers' final roster spot. I don't know who they would even consider for that. There could be other vets in the mix, could be other young guys. It could be for a team like the Pacers who have flexibility with cap space and roster spots, someone that another team cuts, right? They are in a good position in that way. But just going off the names that have been floated and in the orbit of the Pacers, those guys could also be signed at some point. So I think a good camp competition is good, but the timing of all this is fluid. It might depend on who's doing well, who's doing poorly, and just when it makes sense. A lot of teams have already been signing and waiving guys. The Milwaukee Bucks just got in on this with Alex Antetokounmpo. So we'll see where this all ends up for the Pacers, but that is something I expect to still see coming this offseason. There's a couple other things I think you'll hear stuff asked about, but may not necessarily happen. Some of these will happen, some of these may not. Another one beyond the Exhibit 10 dance is Goga Bitadze and Buddy Hield extensions. Miles Turner is extension eligible as well, but his goes into the season. So I'm not counting that as an off-season thing. That's just a thing. That could happen during the season at any time, after the trade deadline even. But before the season starts is when Buddy Hield and Goga's extension deadline would theoretically be. They can add years and dollars to both of those deals. Rookie scale extension for Bitadze has a little different rules than a veteran extension for Hield. Look, both of them have some spot in the NBA, but the Pacers have a lot of bigs on their team, including a lot of young bigs, and Buddy Hield's on the wrong side of the age curve for the Pacers, despite being talented, and it's probably a little overpaid right now. So I think for both of those guys, you kind of zoom out on their extension and say, yeah, if they're willing to take a bargain deal to return to the Pacers for longer, sure, the Pacers should agree to that. Bargain deals are good, and their assets still going into future seasons. Beyond that, though, I think the flexibility and optionality is more important for the Pacers in extending those guys. So that deadline is something to keep an eye on. I think I'll probably ask front office people, Rick Carlisle, whoever, about those extensions, but I would not expect extensions for either player unless, again, it is a bargain. Something else that could happen this offseason, and certainly will. The deadline is technically October 31st, so this is something that will happen during the season, not an offseason move, but still an offseason procedural thing some teams will do before the season starts. Rookie scale options. Talked about these on one podcast back way in July. How this works is if a player's drafted in the first round, they're on a rookie scale contract, and they have two team options on their deal in the third and fourth year, but the decision for that option comes a full year early, right? So Chris Duarte, to make this example easy, even for Pacers fans who've been following his career, he just finished his first year, and after the first year, the Pacers have to decide on his third-year team option for his third season. They'll have to decide on that before his second season. So by October 31st, they have four guys on rookie scale deals who still have future team options undecided. The third-year team option of Chris Duarte, no-brainer. No brainer. 100% they're going to pick that up. The third-year option for Isaiah Jackson, their 22nd pick last year, also a no-brainer. Again, easy peasy. The fourth-year option for Tyrese Haliburton, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. These are all super easy. They will be, I mean, they could do it tomorrow and no one would complain. There is one guy who it's not as obvious, and that's Aaron Nesmith's fourth-year option, right? He was drafted by Boston in the same draft as Tyrese Haliburton, as he went with that 14th pick. So he's headed into the last year of his rookie scale deal. If the Pacers pick up that option, $5.6 million of Aaron Nesmith for 2023-24. I think the Pacers should pick it up. Not because Aaron Nesmith might be worth that or might not be, because the opportunity cost, extremely low. They're going to have a ton of cap space next summer anyway, unless they have grand plans for their cap space and they know for a pretty strong fact they're going to be able to use it productively. I think it makes the most sense to keep Nesmith, even if he doesn't produce this year. It's at worst a little bit of bad salary flotsam to use in a trade, but I said the same thing about TJ Leaf, ironically, not because I thought TJ Leaf was deserving of more years in the NBA, but because the opportunity cost for the Pacers was super low. They were already over the cap. They couldn't replace him. And then the coronavirus hit and changed the salary cap, and they needed to salary dump him. So perhaps a situation where the salary cap changes could make it impossible to predict the right move for Nesmith. But given the things we know now, and it's not like he's been bad in his first 2 years, he's just been a little inconsistent finding a role. I think the Pacers will pick up all 4 of their rookie scale options when they come. But Nesmith is the one that maybe they would like to see him, in camp, in preseason, things like that. So I think all 4 of those guys will be picked up at some point before the season starts. And the last thing the Pacers have to do rosterly, procedurally, whatever, before the season starts, fill their last two-way spot. Maybe it's somebody they already have on the team that they'll convert their deal. Maybe it's someone new. It's just guessing to predict anybody. Of the guys they have signed now, like I guess Dividas Servidis, given his experience, his young age, he's a wing who can maybe shoot it, would be the leader in the clubhouse. But Jermaine Samuels showed a lot of those skills in the past and in Summer League as well. So, of the guys in their orbit, a lot of guys could potentially make sense on the two-way. They like having guards on two-way deals. Maybe they like Eli Brooks for the spot, or any of the 2-point guards that they signed already. Gabe York was on a two-way last year, for example. We'll see, but that is something else they will do. It could be any number of players. It could not be James Johnson, Langston Galloway, or Lance Stevenson. They have too many years of experience to be on a two-way contract. That's the roster stuff to expect as they come. We'll, of course, cover them all here on Locked On Pacers, and when I get answers for you about the why, the numbers, the things like that, you'll, of course, hear it from me on this podcast. Now, let's talk about Tyrese Haliburton, top 50 NBA player per our Locked On NBA top 50 with partnership with BetOnline. And speaking of BetOnline, let me talk to you guys about them really quickly, because betonline.net is your number one source for all of your pro and college football betting needs, as well as sports info this season. You can find all the latest football league developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts, including this year's opening week games, over at betonline.net. They've got Colts Chiefs this Sunday. Colts 0-1-1. The Chiefs are favored by 6.5. Unsurprising for the Colts home opener against Kansas City. If you're an IU guy like me, an alumni, undefeated Hoosiers in Cincinnati. Cincinnati's favored by 16.5. That makes sense to me. All those lines and more over at betonline.net, your continued source for all your sports wagering information, live betting, esports, and scores. Plus, it's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite sports and events. They got MLB, MMA, boxing, golf, soon to be NBA, only about 10 days away from NBA action returning. Head over to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action over at BetOnline, because BetOnline is where the game starts. Back here on Locked On Pacers, thanks for making us your first listen every single day. Free and available on all platforms here on the Locked On Podcast Network and YouTube. You can see my beautiful face and our now here guest, beautiful face Nick Angstadt, host of Locked On Mavs, channel manager for the Locked On NBA team, is here because he's one of the few people qualified to talk about both of our next two topics here as we dive into both EuroBasket and the Locked On NBA top 50. Every outlet and their mother and their uncle put out top 100 rankings today. Locked Ons are a little different, which I thought was cool. It was their
50
players' influence on the betting line. So which players matter the most in that way? And Tyrese Haliburton made the list of the top 50. He slotted in at 50. The last guy to make the cut, but he was within the project, which I thought was cool. You should check it out on Monday's video. I am in there. Nick, how did you feel about this ranking, this way of looking at players' values? And do you agree that Haliburton at 50 makes a lot of sense?
I thought the ranking was different. And by the way, it's different than the other ones because it's only 50 and everybody else did 100. I feel like every outlet today was like 100 players, and we were only.
Can we do a top 450 next year on Locked On NBA?
Just for like every single player.
Yeah, rank the whole league.
And then somebody would be like, where would Carmelo fit into this? Really, like,
are you serious? This second round pick should be at least 345.
We'll argue about anything. I mean, that's what we're here for. But I really liked how they did this list because it at least puts value to them and at least puts value to some of the players. And you mentioned Tyrese Haliburton makes it, and BetOnline told us that he would move the line by 1.5 points. I find that really interesting because that actually equates a value to somebody instead of just like Tyrese Haliburton is 50, Scotty Barnes is 49. So that means Scotty Barnes must be miles better than Tyrese Haliburton. Sometimes we look at these lists and think about it like that. But when you actually equate, a number to it, it says, okay, well, this is how much that player means to this game. And then you go to the top of the list, and I'll throw out the top of the list is Luka Doncic and Giannis are up there, and they're both worth 7.5 points. And so you see the difference between what a bona fide star in the NBA or what like a rising young really good player can do in the league. And so I find that point value system really really interesting. Now, when we get to the playoffs and things like that, these things definitely change. But during the regular season, game to game, the games that are going to matter for the Pacers this year, these numbers mean a lot.
Yeah, and Tyrese is fascinating because, if you zoom out from a whole NBA perspective, 1.5, a lot of guys are around there. But to the Pacers specifically, I would have said, like, in terms of the line of the game, and I think Luka falls in this camp a lot too, which is why I thought when the project was described to us, he might be number one. It's like the Mavs don't have a guy who can even close to replicate that. They don't have another all-star, art star, or anything like that. So if Luka's out, the Mavs are a totally different team. They're way worse, and they 7.5 points is a lot, but like their style of play changes, the way they have to play is different. And that's sort of the case for Haliburton too. Obviously, the Pacers are way worse than the Mavs, and Haliburton's not as good as Luka. Like I'm not debating their ranking in the list by doing this, but I think that for those guys, their influence on the line may be a little stronger than a similar talent level player because of the situation they're in and their team system, which I think is an interesting way to look at value because it also measures importance to your team, right? Giannis at the top makes sense. He's amazing. But I thought that was an extra wrinkle that made it a little more quantifiable and understandable.
Yeah, they tried to tell us that they didn't consider backups, so it wasn't like a WAR, like in baseball. It wasn't like a wins above replacement necessarily statistic or ranking of these, but there's no way you can't consider that in the line, right? Like I can't imagine that you wouldn't look at, all right, well, who else is around Tyrese Haliburton and say, like that's the reason he's on this list, right? Is that there's no one else on the Pacers. If he was off, if he was not playing on any given night, the Pacers would be not favored in the game, or they would be favored by 1.5 points less, or 1.5 points more of an underdog, I guess, if you want to put it that way.
They're not favored. Are they playing the the Pistons? No. Okay.
I was going to say, which teams would they be favored? Like maybe the 4 teams they would be favored against, but yeah, the line would be 1.5 points lower even than that. But yeah, him making this list, I feel like means a lot for the Pacers because it's such a point in the direction of, hey, you have somebody to build a team around, because the rest of these players, I mean, you'd probably build a team around, bro, for the most part.
For sure. I was curious when we realized or released that it was going to be top 50. I was like, oh man, it's going to be close. Like ESPN came out with theirs today, Haliburton in their more subjective ranking, 59, right? Like I thought it was going to be close for Tyrese in this list, but his impact to the Pacers obviously huge. And I don't think people disagree with him being around that spot, and he'll clearly move up. But being there now is significant for the Pacers to get that guy. The funny part to me was on the BetOnline list, Sabonis is 41, right? The Pacers' bet is that Tyrese will eventually be higher, or else they wouldn't have done the trade. Like that's not that big of a gap in terms of the line and MVP, or excuse me, and game-winning movement and things like that, which I think is fascinating. And part of what I wanted to talk about in this is like, how much can he move up from 50, right? He's like 22 right now, right? And Scotty Barnes is right in front of him. So, of course, it makes him look bad that the guy right in front of him is 20. But, like, right above them, Marcus Smart, Klay Thompson, Van Vliet, Wiggins, Draymond, a lot of guys that maybe even during this season, he could vault past and move up. Like, it's very telling that he's already in top 50 lists for the NBA, regardless of how you kind of talk about it.
Yeah, it is a big deal. And when you talk about how he can move up, it's start looking at the players that are younger, that are maybe even necessarily on bad teams. Cade Cunningham is at 38. He moves the line 2 points. Now, BetOnline, after they put point totals to each of them, they just decided to use their own rankings to put them in an order. And so, like, Cade Cunningham's worth 2 points. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's 2 points as well. They're on opposite ends of the 2-point tier here. So Cade is ranked 38 and SGA is worth 43. So if we're talking about how Haliburton can move up, it's all right. Can he make that much of an impact and get to, where Cade is now? Can he increase his value by 0.5 points, and then he's in the late 30s or something like that? If they don't make this Lakers trade and they find their way in the play-in race somehow, then I could see them pushing him that much, because he's going to be the one he's going to get the credit for their success if they do end up doing something like that.
Thank you for saying Lakers. I can put it in the title now and get twice as many clicks. Much appreciated. You covered
the
Luka,
Lakers trade happen,
and you used to cover Rick Carlisle. How convenient. Luka didn't start. Luka's number 2, as you mentioned earlier. He didn't start there. He didn't come into the league as number 2. He was really good. But what what took him up there? You would know better than me. What took him up there, and what did Rick do to help him in that way? And do you feel like, as the coach of Tyrese Haliburton now, he can do something similar to help Haliburton move from 52, not two, I don't think anyone thinks he has that much potential, but to that echelon, all-star, all-NBA kind of candidate guy?
Yeah, Rick Carlisle has always had this reputation of like, oh, he hates young players, he hates rookies, and I even asked him about that one time. I was in a press conference. This was either before Luka or just around the time they drafted Luka. I asked him, I was like, what do you think about this perception that you don't like young players? What do you think about this? And he gave me like some snarky Rick Carlisle answer. Didn't answer the question, but I thought about it a lot. And he doesn't like young players until the point where he feels like they can really help the team win. I mean, he played Luka Doncic, he played Jalen Brunson up until the playoffs that last year he was with the Mavericks. And the thing about Rick and Luka was that he noticed right away that he was special, and so he started him right away. Obviously, he started all 72 games his rookie year, but he didn't give him the ball. He didn't put the ball in his hands right away. But as soon as he realized it, and kind of the team realized, oh my God, this guy is something different. He's like a top 20 player, top 10 player in the NBA. They made a bunch of trades and sort of forced Carlisle's hand. But to give Carlisle credit, he started putting the ball in Luka's hands more, and like halfway through his rookie season, they really gave him the keys. And then the second year, it was all completely in Luka's hands. Like he knew after just 1 year, okay, it's in Luka's hands now. We can trust Luka with it. And he was willing to do that because of how good of a talent he was. And so I'm interested to see with the Pacers, at what point does Rick decide that? Or at what point does Rick give the keys to Haliburton? But on the other hand, the Mavericks thing with Carlisle was that he kind of gave the keys to Dennis Smith Jr. like right away. Now that team was tanking, but he was willing to do that. And like, how many points? Dennis averaged like, I don't know, like 15, 16 shots a game his rookie or his second year in the NBA. His first year he averaged just about 15 shots a game, which is like way too much for Dennis Smith Jr. as a player. But he's willing to put the ball in somebody's hands if the team has definite motivation to make that player have a good season or at least prove something to the team.
I've told this story on this podcast before, but Luka actually changed the way Rick answered the question you just described in a presser, because he was playing Duarte a lot early in this season. And so I wanted to ask him about that too, because there's a Tim McMahon article about a while ago, but still, when Rick getting fired in Detroit was largely because he wouldn't play a young Tayshaun Prince, right? And then that perception carried with him for a long time. So I was like, hey, Tim McMahon wrote this. You've had this perception, like, what makes you so confident in playing Duarte? And he said, well, I played Luka a lot, didn't I? And I was like, okay, yes, that is true. So Luka was the guy who maybe changed his perception on young players a little bit. But hey, the Pacers are sort of on that similar path now, where they traded away Brogdon. I think they realized, okay, Tyrese is good. Like, let's give this guy the ball all the time.
Yeah.
Their off-ball guards aren't necessarily creators. Buddy Hield, Ben Matherin's a rookie. Maybe he is. Chris Duarte. So I think that Haliburton could be in a similar situation. But again, he's not as good as Luka. So we'll see how much it actually forces him to improve in year 3. But I'll be curious how Rick can set him up for success and how much he can move up this list going into next year. Nick, something else you covered that I also covered, EuroBasket. Ooh. Perhaps my favorite basketball competition in the non-NBA division, in the non-pro basketball division in America in a long time. It was awesome. It was so much fun. Daniel Tice got a medal. Goga played some great games and got in a fight, which wasn't as good. But it was awesome. And I want to talk about both the Pacers players and some rules I would steal from that tournament with you. Really quickly, before we do that, I want to tell my listeners about Acre Pro. When it comes to land sales, it pays to have experts in your corner. And Acre Pro Midwest Farm Group are your local farmland specialists. With decades of experience in Indiana agriculture, no one knows the market better. Whether you're doing a 1031 exchange, expanding your operation, or selling a row crop farm, your local Acre Pro agent will walk the land with you and ensure a deal is done right. Great service is just the beginning. Acre Pro provides unparalleled land data, including soil ratings, elevation, flood zones, and land valuation across parcels. So you get the full picture up front and you can be confident in the entire land market. Your agent will cater to each of your individual needs to help you navigate the complexities of buying and selling land. So the process is made simple. Experience the ease of Acre Pro by working with their farmland specialists, and visit acrepro.com or call 765-587-3185 and talk to your local land expert today. That's acrepro.com, and it's 765-587-3185. Back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. This is an obvious second listen. How about Locked On Mavs, where Nick and Isaac Harris
Oh,
cover all things Mavs and Luka Doncic, and they covered EuroBasket and the Slovenia team that had the biggest upset in the tournament. Unfortunately, knocked them out. Although, my gosh, AJ Slaughter should be in the NBA. That dude can play for Poland. Either way, EuroBasket was fantastic. Luka's Slovenia was one of only two teams to beat Daniel Theis's Germany in the tournament. Big moment for the Pacers is Theis's Germany get third. And they were playing at home a lot. A lot of the knockout games were in Berlin, but they were not expected to get third. Dennis Schroeder played very well. Obviously, Theis did well as a starter. Franz Wagner obviously turned some heads. But, dude, EuroBasket was just awesome. And I know that you guys have covered it because Luka's been playing and playing very well. But even beyond the Luka angle, didn't you just love this style of play? And it's just a different brand of basketball that's super fun to watch.
the thing that stood out to me first, and I know you're going to ask about rule changes, was that the fast breaks. Like, there's way more fast breaks in EuroBasket. They don't have the take foul, which the NBA is trying to get rid of, and I feel like the refs even went a step further and just wouldn't call stuff. Like, wouldn't even call a take foul when a player as they shouldn't call it, but a player would go in transition, and it actually hurt Slovenia at the end there. Like, the very last play against Poland, they had a chance to hit a shot, and there was like an obvious egregious foul, but it was sort of in transition. It was all kinds of a big mess, and then they just didn't call it, and it could have gone in Slovenia's way, but decided not to. But just the transition, the way that you're able to push the ball a little bit more, the way that you're able to to move up and down, I thought that was like such a big thing. The way that you can like affect the ball around the rim, there's not like the offensive goaltending kind of stuff like that. That threw me off every once in a while when someone
like twice as good.
Yeah, it's true. But when Mike Tobey, Slovenia's center, would go up and like try to smack the ball off of the rim, I was like, wait, hold on. It you had to like twitch for a second just trying to get off of the NBA rules.
Yeah, it was fantastic. The stylistically, even beyond the rules, like it's just more brawn is the word I typed. Like there's a lot more contact that goes uncalled, and like there's a lot of screens and just like contact and oomph in a way that on a lot of in the NBA free flowing possession. Like I still love the NBA, but just sometimes it's missing what made EuroBasket fun. And from a Pacers perspective, the way that worked with some more like tough post contact and things like that. Daniel Theis was like the perfect player on Germany, right? Every possession, he would just run up and set this crazy screen and then run back to the post, then set another screen, like over and over and over again. And him and Dennis Schroeder were this killer tandem that ended up elevating Germany way beyond what most people thought they would do. It was perfect for him. Germany medaled. They beat Poland, which Slovenia couldn't do, I heard. They beat Poland in the third place game handily. Theis finishes the tournament with 9 point and six rebound, averages for the Germans. Goga's team, Georgia, they were the host team for their group. If they didn't blow it against Belgium, they would have made the knockout stage. They got eliminated in group stages. Goga obviously played pretty well comparative to expectations. Started every game, 10 points, 6 rebounds. He did get injured, but bounced back, was able to play. His big story was obviously the fight with Furkan Korkmaz that led to some punishments from FIBA, but the punishments came after they were already eliminated, so we don't really know what those are. Either way, in general, both of those guys were well suited to the way EuroBasket's played, where they can play through contact a little more, but still kind of be involved around the play, things like that, where they can show off their decision making. And it was an awesome environment for them, and in general for me, because I loved every game. And speaking of Germany, Slovenia did beat Germany, but not when it mattered, not in the bracket part. So despite Slovenia getting, they lost in the quarterfinals, right? They did not do better.
Second round. No, second round. They this team was so frustrating. They basically played down or up to their competition. They would go in and like really take care of Germany or France, and then they would lose to to Poland and other teams in the group stage. Bosnia they lost to in the group stage.
Hey, Jusuf Nurkic was fantastic. Again, another guy that kind of brawn is the word I typed. Like it fit them very well. You know what I mean?
It was EuroBasket was so interesting because at certain points you would just have like it's not NBA, right? Where you can just kind of like you can even out a team and every best talent is trying to go play in this. And so you would have certain teams where you're like, "Oh my gosh, like somebody if there's a really good post player, if Embiid or Jokic is playing, they're just going to dominate because you're playing against some bigs that are on just like wouldn't even play in the G League probably in the NBA because of just how under under talent they are. And then you would have some other teams where you're like, oh well, they just don't like Slovenia at a certain point. If they're missing a player, they just didn't have any wings, so you could just get taken advantage of on the edges. And so it's the talent disparity between some of the teams just in different like positionally was so vast that you could just take advantage of certain things. And I think that's why some of that play stood out to us, because certain teams could just do certain things that you just can't do in the NBA because the talent is just so even across the board.
Yeah, it was like a lot of non-NBA guys were really impressive. Even for Germany, they
Yeah,
had
true.
some shooters that I was like, I'd never heard of you before. Like, why have I not heard your name in the NBA sphere? Like AJ Slaughter on Poland, who we
Great.
talked about briefly earlier. He played summer league for the Pistons once, and then has just played overseas ever since. But like, he was like one of the 10 best players in the tournament. Like, he was amazing. Lorenzo Brown made all EuroBasket first team. He's barely crossed the NBA landscape. Like, it's crazy how these dudes are just off the radar for a lot of NBA fans. So there are different rules. You alluded to some of them earlier. The off the rim block. If a shot goes up and hits the rim, if it's still up and you can reach it, you can knock it away. No take foul. My favorite, if I could take one thing to the NBA from EuroBasket, technical fouls for flopping. Oh, that was so satisfying. Dennis Schroeder did it for Germany twice in this tournament, where he would just like, he would reach and then they would try to knock his hand away and he would just flail like crazy. And it's like, it would have been a foul on the other team if you didn't flop, but he just goes crazy and gets attacked. And I love it. I love not rewarding that behavior. It drives me bananas in the NBA. That would be the number one rule I would take, although honestly, a lot of them were good.
Luka had a classic one against France and Rudy Gobert, and he loves trying to take Rudy Gobert out of any games and just will immediately just flop as soon as even in the NBA, like in the playoffs, he would do this. But he had one where he was like, Rudy Gobert was just standing at the free throw line and Luka was near him and he just fell down like out of nowhere. Wasn't called for technical, but we were all kind of holding our breath, waiting to see if it would happen. That's a really good one but it's so hard to call because in the NBA, the flopping is just so frequent. It just happens so much, and it's so quick too. We all see it in slow motion, and so we're just
looks ridiculous.
We're like, oh, that's obvious. He didn't get touched at all. And, the nose didn't get touched at all by the elbow or whatever. But that's a good one. Honestly, the take foul one, I'm interested to see how it happens in the NBA because they're going to try to implement it, and we'll see if it adds more fast breaks because the NBA desperately needs it, and the Mavericks desperately need it too. They're like last in the NBA in pace by a lot.
I don't know about you, Nick, but when I was a kid, I would pay money for tickets to see guys foul on fast breaks. That was my favorite part of the game.
Especially if it was like a player that had a couple fouls already and then fouled, and then all of a sudden in foul trouble, and you're like, what are we doing?
Yeah, I like the NBA solution of the shot plus ball, but I thought they might do something like make it be 2 fouls or something like that because. Like the foul is not enough.
Really take it out.
And 6 is a lot of fouls. Like dudes have figured out how to get around that for 4 decades now. I don't know. But either way, I'm glad they came up with the solution. The block off the rim is interesting. I mean, dudes swish so many shots at the pro level. It might not matter. But I would wonder if it was like a timing element, like if it was like 1 second, if that would be the way to bring it to the NBA. I don't know. That one's not as impactful. You didn't see it as much and some of the dudes, it's like habit. Like they still just sit and watch because they're not used to it.
Yeah, and it happened in FIBA too. There was a couple times where guys would just sit and watch. I'm like, you could grab that, like if you really wanted to. But yeah, I think it's the athleticism of the NBA that takes some of these rules, and you're like, oh, it would be so easy for like prime DeAndre Jordan to abuse that rule off the rim because he's right
and under the basket like every
palm it, just grab the ball,
grab it off. I wondered if the negative consequence would be that like if you go and you miss, you're out of rebound position, but the ball's not moving very fast if it's on the rim, so they don't miss. It's not hard. Yeah. There's no real downside to going for it, which made it
just probably those not ones that rim out, I guess.
Yeah, the toilet ones, is that what every kid calls them? I loved EuroBasket. I think a lot. If you have ESPN Plus, I think you can go back and actually watch a lot of the recordings. Like championship game was sick. I'd recommend every Italy game because they were all completely ridiculous in some way, shape, or form. Honestly, every Germany game was up 15 at halftime, tied at the end of the third quarter, and then they win somehow. So if you want to watch Daniel Tyson, get a good feel for him before he joins the Pacers next week, that is a good way to do it. Hey, thanks for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today. Now, go make your second listen. Something we talked about earlier, the NBA top 50 on Locked On NBA. Which NBA player moves the betting line the most this season? Locked On and BetOnline odds makers present the NBA top 50 most valuable players. Find it on Locked On NBA, wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. Nick, over here. I still am bad at pointing in the opposite direction when I'm on camera on YouTube. He's on Twitter at Nick Van Exit. You can find him at Locked On Mavs, covering a very fascinating Mavs team that people seem to think are going to have a little drop off after losing Jalen Brunson. Let's see what the Mavs guys have to say. You can listen to him and Isaac Harris every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm on Twitter at TEastNBA. Back tomorrow talking about some of the reserve forwards upcoming season. Kendall Brown, Terry Taylor, O'Shea Brissett. What to watch for ahead of their campaign. We'll do Haliburton on Friday, unless there's some big news Thursday, which, again, I cannot officially talk about yet, but we'll see. Either way, listen to Locked On Mavs, listen to Locked On Pacers. We'll be back tomorrow. Till then, everybody, have a fantastic day.